very good afternoon to friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's absolutely a pleasure, Rashmi ji and Rajita, to be back amidst all of you at this EvalFest 2024. No doubt this annual event, which is this Evaluation Fest, it has actually become a very significant event in strengthening the evaluation culture in India, and especially in the monitoring and evaluation calendar, capacity building calendar, if you see, for the entire country. So it's really good to be back and to listen to the developments that have happened, and also to share with you a little bit of a perspective from a person who's worked 25 years in the development sector, both across the state government, across cities, across planning, across Niti Aayog and Government of India here. So obviously, I'll begin with congratulating ECOI and EvalYouth for making this event so significant, and especially at the conclusion of the 3 days and the rich discussions that have happened across the last 3 days. I think these deliberations have been extremely fruitful. We look forward to a compendium of all the developments that have happened, the discussions that have gone so far. But as we get into the intricacies of the Indian evaluation system, one thing is very important to recognize the fact that the M&E actually plays a very pivotal role when it comes to shaping our policies, our programs, our interventions, but also it focuses on the challenges and the opportunities which lie ahead, and also point to the transformative potential that collaboration and innovation can actually play in M&E practices, in shaping our M&E practices to go beyond. So India's journey, if we see in the M&E realm, you've heard about it across. I'll not take much. There are some, I always believe there should be some visuals to keep the attention of our audience here, so that you can listen and see at the same time. So yes, it began with developing focused institutions, dedicated institutions, and this can be traced back to, you've heard about the DMU, you've heard about the Niti Aayog and so on. Institutions to do what? To encourage evidence-based policy making and accountability. In my last 25 years, what I've personally seen is a remarkable shift in perception about how to measure progress. And definitely true to my loyalties towards working on the sustainable development goals for the last 7-8 years, I will definitely go by that axiom that in the post-SDG world, it definitely, boils down to what gets measured gets done. And the opposite is also true. What doesn't get measured obviously goes into the back shelves of our lovely offices. So having said so, this catchphrase has now percolated down to every level of the government, every independent, organization, civil society organizations, not only because we are we are driven by donor incentives, but also for the benefit of it, as an end in itself and as a means to an end, both of it. So going further, what can we say about the change in our stance towards M&E? I definitely would appeal to all of you here that we have the SDGs to thank for when we are talking about the evolution of the M&E system. And to this, why? Because the SDG framework, with that entire, the 2030 agenda with the 17 set of goals and the 169 monitorable, measurable targets, what did it give us? It gave the world since 2015 a unifying framework, a framework to measure progress across multifarious tech sectors, ranging from poverty to healthcare to education, to things like gender equality, to ecological preservation and so on. So cross-sector and a whole gamut of sectors got covered under the SDGs. And what it also did, it gave us that framework which for evaluation, for facilitating cross-sectoral collaboration and alignment of national priorities to globally defined yardsticks. So this takes me to the next thing as we move further on into the decade of action, and we are already on the midway of the 2030. The need for comprehensive tracking of our progress through robust monitoring and evaluation frameworks, through strong and robust national data systems and oversight mechanisms is more important now than ever, because we have reached that midpoint. And this alignment of the global SDG framework with India's national policy priorities has truly fostered very remarkable collaborative efforts between government, between ministries, between civil society, between evaluation partners, and all this driven by a collective goal, the goal for better understanding of our shortcomings and strengthening our monitoring and evaluation processes. This takes me to definitely what we evolved, what we started way back in 2017, and the first came out in 2018. So India globally has been at the forefront of developing SDG monitoring frameworks, and this started with the initiatives we led in NITI Aayog, with obviously which is the nodal agency for the SDG implementation in India. With largely these comprehensive frameworks, I'll specifically talk about the SDG India Index, which has often been hailed by the global community and even the UN's public sector report as a very powerful public policy tool which has incentivized the states and triggered action. So why am I focusing on this bit is largely the aim of any M&E system has to actually be to trigger that action which is required for improvement in our policies and programs. Apart from the SDG India Index, we were talking about localization. Localization has been the bread and butter of our work all through the last 7-8 years. So this is again the SDG India Index, and how, you can see the broad outcomes of how geographies are progressing, how geographies are improving across the entire gamut of 17 goals. So apart from this, when we moved further below, we can't talk only at the subnational level and the national level, so we moved further below to the level of our districts when we developed the 120 districts policy measurement tool on the SDGs for the northeastern region. So this is the entire 120 districts. What we also went ahead is we did not stop at the northeastern region itself. We actually worked with all the state governments, the larger states, the states which have greater capacity and resources, to develop their district level monitoring frameworks on the SDGs, and you will see most of the states have their own ranking and measurement mechanism for all their districts. Moving on, obviously the SDG Urban Index, who can leave the cities behind, especially at a time when cities are our engines of growth, and there are estimates saying that by 2030, 50% of India's population will be living in cities. So we developed the Urban Index as well, because we have to take it down to that absolute grassroots level of our cities and our blocks and gram panchayats. Now, the National Multidimensional Poverty Index, I'm sure you've heard about it, you've read about it, 2 editions have come out, which kind of went so granular in terms of measuring the very basic SDGs at the level of all the 700 districts in the country. And look at how we have been tracking our SDG progress with very high resolution at the most granular level, and making largely why? To create these public policy tools, to use the information and the data which is out there in the public domain, so that it aids our policy makers not only at the level of the center, at the state, but district administrators, the district magistrates, the collectors, even at going down to the level of the blocks, to use these in order to focus on the programs and interventions which will lead to better outcomes. So this unprecedented demand for very high quality and high frequency granular data driven by the 2030 agenda, as you can see, has also acted as a very big catalyst. What has it driven? It has actually driven innovation in data. I think that is what is the most important crux of it, because for years we have had a statistical system which has done in a particular process, and that process requires revamping, that process requires re-engineering using technology, using data. Now, for example, governments are now moving beyond the long-standing, very traditional data sources such as household surveys, and are now looking at harnessing insights from massive amount of administrative data that is generated real time across a plethora of schemes, programs, centrally sponsored schemes, state schemes, and name it. Now, most state governments we see are embracing modern technologies, big data, artificial intelligence, and inclusive approaches as well, going down to the level of the community to strengthen their administrative data, and especially to monitor the programmatic outcomes. tools such as small area estimation, citizen-generated data now are being discussed very openly and in a lot of forums. But obviously, citizen-generated data from the government side, I can definitely say requires a massive push, and that is where our partners like ECOI can actually play a massive role in this, a very constructive role. Now, the journey towards 2030, which I will again, because I have been a very SDG person, it has also actually provided us a range of experiences and learnings. And what is most important here, I feel, is the integration of SDG monitoring and evaluation efforts needs to happen not only at the national level, but also at the state level and the district levels. Emphasizing basically what? That the global priorities have to somewhere align with our local priorities, and the local context cannot be cold-shouldered. This takes me obviously to my most favorite topic, which is the localization of SDGs in India. Me and my team, several of my team members are here. So we've worked, from 2017 onwards, we consistently worked in terms of developing our very own Indian brand of SDG localization model. Sitting in Delhi, sitting in Niti Aayog, it couldn't happen that state governments, which are being run by different political parties, would actually listen to us and would align their development priorities with the SDGs, with what Niti Aayog was telling. And that's the beauty of the Indian localization model. So if we see, this is the cornerstone, and this holds the key to our country achieving the SDGs. And this is what I would like to share with you. When we began our work in 2017, the numbers, if you see with the states, would be in single-digit numbers. There would be an Assam who would be doing wonderful work. There would be a Karnataka doing wonderful work. But then most of the states would be like, okay, tell us what the SDGs are. Tell us why we should move in evaluation and monitoring from just expenditure and inputs to SDG outcomes. So that is where the value lied in terms of creating this model, and the results, friends, is right in front of you. The fact that today 22 states, union territories have a vision document for SDGs, 29 states have state level and 17 have district level SDG indicator frameworks, and 16 have already linked their SDG outcomes to their budget allocation. This talks about the fact that the states have actually taken the lead. Now they have become the key drivers of SDGs in our country. And this, I think, we will take a little bit of credit on this as well, because this was a huge team effort. From 2017, we were doing these capacity building workshops in all the states. We covered 29 states and union territories across 4-6 years. Every year we were holding multiple of 3 to 4 technical workshops in all these states, sensitizing right from the chief minister, who will give the political will and the pressure, and to the district level functionaries as well. So what is the Indian model of SDG localization? Very simply put, paucity of time, 4 main pillars. Creating dedicated institutions. So ministries and governments, if you know, they're different turfs, different ministries working in different sectors. How do you bring them together? Where do you bring in the convergence? So this horizontal convergence came in only when dedicated institutions were created both at the central level and at the state level, who were anchoring the SDG agenda. Again, pillar number 2, this is what the crux is all about, the entire EvalFest is all about, creating these robust review and monitoring systems which are focused not on inputs, not on expenditure, but on the SDG outcomes, on the cross-cutting outcomes, and which would lead to programmatic intervention and trigger action. Again, developing capacities, huge capacity development, statistical and monitoring capacities, technological capacities, this was and lastly, obviously, bringing in the entire society, particularly the civil society partners, the business sector, in this entire government approach and make it a whole of society approach. So where have we gone so far? Friends, you can see that we've come a long way in measuring our progress towards the 2030 agenda. Over a span of 7 years, the number of indicators in the global SDG database, as you can see, has increased from 115 in 2016 to 225 in 2023, and the data records have increased from 330,000 to 2.7 million in the same time period. So you can see this is the tremendous power that SDGs brought to countries. Power, opportunity, challenge, everything I can put it together, and look at the development that suddenly statistical systems had to kind of push themselves to that edge to cope with this entire system. So today all indicators have very well established and internationally agreed upon methodologies, ensuring that our measurements are comparable, accurate and reliable as well. And obviously, they also focus on the challenges and gaps that exist, of which obviously there are still many. And that's again a very long process where the UN organizations are working with the evaluation partners in order to develop these methodologies. Now the gaps is largely, what are the big challenges here? Are largely the gaps that we have in terms of having a comprehensive system for measuring our collective progress. Now geographic coverage, the timeliness, the disaggregation, the limited awareness and understanding of evaluation concepts. Apart from that, the capacity of our statistical systems remain still areas of concern. If you see the cross-cutting areas of SDGs, for example, climate action, for example, resilience, for example, leaving no one behind, which is actually the inclusion, how we are including every aspect of society in this growth. Climate action. These are some challenge areas which still do not have which face the problems of availability of data, quality of globally comparable data, and even lack the methodologies for addressing them. Obviously, the lack of standardized methodologies, the fragmented data ecosystems that we have, state one, the center separate, again the districts would be very separate, and the absence of a robust evaluation infrastructure. These would obviously be some of the challenges which our evaluation partners and specialists could actually delve into it and try to think of creating how a better ecosystem to address these. While we have made significant headway in measuring robust frameworks for the SDGs, systematic evaluations still remain an area of major concern. For example, I think the biggest challenge here would be the absence of a national evaluation policy, uniform guidelines or mandates for programmatic evaluations, and a lack of capacity for monitoring and evaluation stand as the major roadblocks to this. And what we would really impress upon is for such partners, for eval partners, ECOI, to help with the government, maybe with the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, or with DME, or whoever is the suitable partner, in terms of thinking about how different countries are approaching the concept of having an evaluation policy, and how can India actually work towards having a policy. Because to say that you have a policy, you don't implement it, that's a second step. But we need to first address the first lacuna, that we don't have a policy as such. So in the end, I would like to just, some suggestions in terms of what can happen and what should happen in terms of strengthening our M&E systems is largely, I would like to address the three core objectives here. This applies both to decision makers, to public policy makers, to academics, academicians, and to practitioners, development practitioners across all sectors. So the first, definitely we need to critically analyze what are the gaps in the existing M&E systems using very globally recognized tools and frameworks. I have named some of them. The Monitoring and Evaluation Systems Analysis, or the MISA of World Bank. Secondly, the National Evaluation Capacities Index. Now, without a thorough diagnostic of our existing M&E systems, which are pretty ad hoc, here, there, state something, center something, ministry something, we really can't hope to reliably address these gaps. We need to highlight the best practices and also develop a very coherent plan for the way forward. And this will actually benefit both legislators, implementers, bureaucracy, practitioners, and development experts in terms of understanding what are the existing gaps. So this would generally be a diagnosis. The second is obviously, when you have a diagnosis, what do? You do a process engineering. So the second objective is there's a need to work for us towards creating an enabling environment. And this is like a sort of this exactly what we are doing right here. So more often than not, evaluations are carried out in a very one-sided manner. Worked in government, worked in different ministries, we've seen it how it happens. when you have to renew a scheme has to be renewed, has to go for a cabinet approval. There is a mandatory requirement get an evaluation done. And what happens when the administrative ministry sponsors the evaluation? I will not answer it. You know everything on that aspect. So, as an example, for the government, an evaluation may be driven by a regulatory compliance. Again, for the civil society, it may be done for academic interests. So, on both sides, the evaluations are often treated as an end in itself and not as a means to an end. Somewhere there has to be a mindset change here. There needs to be long-term institutional collaborations between government, between M&E practitioners, essentially to ensure that the value of evaluations is respected and that its findings go back into that policy-making action and it leads to tweaking in the right way, in the positive way at some point of time. And the third objective, what do you do after the diagnosis and the process engineering? You teach. You teach everybody to kind of follow the system, to create and learn from the system. So developing capacities, ladies and gentlemen, for conducting, commissioning, evaluation, both at the institutional level and at the individual level is highly critical. Why at the institutional level? Different institutions, planning ministries, administrative ministries, because when you develop the capacities of institution, it will drive process change. It will change the entire system. At the individual level, why? Because again, individuals go from one place to the other, one organization to the other, to the third organization in the field, implementing programs. What does capacity building do there? It creates a mindset change. We start asking the right questions when we are implementing policies or when we are designing policies, either in the field or sitting in the policy making position. So this obviously includes a very sound understanding of the value of evaluations, the knowledge and the skills regarding evaluation theories and principles, and on methods of how to use the findings from these evaluations. It is at this point that I would like to highlight the need for systematic evaluation capacity development plans, which is so much more important now than ever. Training programs, certification programs, courses, certification courses, knowledge exchange platforms like this, I think these can play a very critical role in equipping evaluators, policymakers, both institutional and individual, to gain those competencies which are required to institute monitoring and evaluation and to use it as well. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, as we stand at a very precarious, let me paint a very gloomy picture right at the end. Sometimes I do it right in the beginning. I paint the gloomy picture in the beginning and say the progress. But today I think because we are in evaluation, we are amidst evaluators. So yes, the hard reality has to come in the end. So we stand at the midpoint of 2030, and as we aspire to build a very Viksit Bharat, as we enter Amrit Kal, what does the latest global data suggest? So there was a stock taking at the UN headquarters just last year during the GS summit. And look at what we find here. So the latest global data assessments from custodian agencies like the UN paint a very concerning picture of approximately the 140 targets that can be evaluated. And half of them show moderate or severe deviations from the desired trajectory. You can see 15% only of the 140 measurable targets are on track, and regressing, off track, everything. And this is true not only for the world, it is true more so for India. Our concern is how we tackle the issue here. Having said so, I will end with a nice quote which we got to read. As a special edition of the Sustainable Development Goals report for 2023, which did this evaluation in fact, it very eloquently puts it, I quote unquote from there, the Sustainable Development Goals are disappearing in the rearview mirror, as is the hopes and rights of current and future generations. A fundamental shift is needed now, ladies and gentlemen, in commitment, in solidarity, in financing, and in action, so that we can take our country on the right path, on a better path. If there ever was a need for better illumination of the short-sightedness of our prevailing statistical and M&E systems, I think it is now. So we have to, at the end of the 3-4 days, we have to come up with what ails our M&E system. So because if we admit that, if we identify that, then begins the second stage of process engineering and course correction. But the solution to this definitely lies in embracing collaboration, innovation, inclusivity, and with this we can navigate the evolving and very dynamic landscape of evaluation with confidence and trust and purpose, leaving behind definitely a legacy of positive change and impact for all generations to come. Thank you once again. I would definitely like to thank Rashmi ji and Rajiv da for having me over here, just to share with you in terms of how our entire body of work feeds into the evaluation system on the SDGs, and where do we go from here in terms of takeaways of the EvalFest, and how do we kind of put in that bit back in terms of diagnosis, in terms of process engineering, in terms of capacity development. A friend here suggested that these 3 roles are actually, if you see it that way, I mean, I'll just go back to the last one. If you see these 3 roles, which caught on to my imagination, the first one is definitely the role of a doctor, doing the diagnosis. So you're the doctors here. Our independent evaluators are the doctors here. And the second one is that of an engineer. How do you kind of correct the system? And lastly also, the entire is that of a teacher. So the doctor, engineer and teacher, I think we have to inculcate those roles in us, in each of us, to understand what ails the process, what further can be done, and how does one make it an entire culture in the country. Thank you so much once again.